We'll now try to connect with our Beijing venue and see if we can hear from our Beijing venue. OK, 小山你好，可以听到我们吗？
问题，您那边可以开始了。
好的，好。北京和国内的观众，大家好，我是李欣，我现在是在这个财新峰会新加坡峰会场。接下来的这一节，我们将用英文进行。Welcome everyone to the Caixin Summit 2021. I'm from the Singapore venue, and it's my great honor to introduce the next speaker, Singapore Deputy Prime Minister Heng Keat, for a keynote speech, and I'll have the honor to have a dialogue with him right afterwards. Let me say a few words, introduce a few words about Deputy Prime Minister Heng Keat. Mr. Heng is also the coordinating minister in Singapore for economic policies. He chairs the Future Economy Council. He chairs the National Reserve Foundation, oversees the strategy group within the Prime Minister's office. A very comprehensive and very targeted role as well. But he's a familiar face to Caixin readers through the interviews, through our coverage of him. And let's give a very warm welcome to DPM Heng Keat, and please join us on stage.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. 在北京的朋友，大家好。I'm glad that we are able to convene the Caixin Summit despite COVID-19. This pandemic has exerted a huge toll on the world. The world experienced its deepest recession since the Great Depression. Countless jobs have been disrupted. The human toll has also been tragic, with more than 5 million lives lost so far. This pandemic is far from over. But the key lesson so far is that when tackling global challenges such as COVID-19, there can be no substitute for global leadership. There were many bright spots in this crisis. We saw an unprecedented level of scientific cooperation, paving the way for the development of vaccines at record speed. I think China released the DNA of the virus, which is an important aspect of this work. The world has also come together to form the COVAX facility to ensure the equitable distribution of vaccines. But we could have done better. The lack of global coordination, especially at the start of a crisis, pointed to a global leadership deficit. Much more can be done to ensure that the least developed countries receive sufficient vaccines. As the world seeks to recover from the pandemic, we'll have to navigate a much more uncertain and complex landscape. The global economy is on the mend, with strong growth projected this year and next. But this cannot be taken as a given. Many regions are still fighting recurrent waves of infection, and we cannot discount the threat of new variants emerging. Beyond COVID-19, there are other challenges that the world faces, as articulated in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We are far from achieving the 2030 targets that were collectively agreed upon. So we'll need greater global leadership as we navigate the more uncertain and complex road ahead. This will not be easy. The urgent need to close the leadership gaps come at a time of stress to the global order, with rising tensions from geopolitical contestation and fraying consensus around globalization. So I hope to share some thoughts today on how we can better focus global leadership on economic recovery and other challenges. And I would like to mention 3 Ps: partnerships, people, and our planet. First, we need to find new building blocks for global economic partnership. In a post-COVID recovery, economic integration is a key pathway to enable countries to create growth and help workers to realize their potential. The lifeblood of economic integration is trade. As a former trade negotiator, I know that trade liberalization is not easy, given that countries have different economic structures and are at different stages of growth. trade negotiations are often hard-fought and consensus hard-earned. I was in Doha in 2001 when China joined the WTO. This was a significant step in global economic integration, but momentum has since stalled. I hope that we can rejuvenate the important work of building a stronger multilateral trading system. But even without a comprehensive global agreement, it is still possible to make progress. One way of doing so is for like-minded partners to establish free trade agreements, which reduce tariff barriers and drive investment flows. Take, for example, the RCEP signed between ASEAN and 5 of our FTA partners. This is the world's largest trade pact, covering 1/3 of the world's population and GDP. I'm pleased that the RCEP will come into force in January next year. The RCEP will expand regional trade flows, deepen cross-border production linkages, and boost the region's competitiveness as a location for the supply chains. The RCEP complements another major trade agreement that came into force at the end of 2018, the CPTPP. The CPTPP has chapters that go beyond the traditional scope of FTAs to address emerging business challenges such as the digital economy and the participation of small and medium enterprises in trade. It is a pity that the US pulled out, but with Japan's leadership, the remaining economies came together to conclude the agreement. Beyond trade, another new building block for global partnership is in digital cooperation. COVID-19 has accelerated the global shift to digital, and we wouldn't have been able to hold this joint meeting with Beijing if not for this digital technology. Now, with the growth of the digital economy, there is also a growing need to foster greater interoperability, ensure the trusted flow of data, and facilitate cross-border transactions. One way to strengthen integration of the digital economy is to develop facilitative digital trade rules through digital economy agreements with our key partners. For example, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, or DEPA, between Singapore, Chile, and New Zealand is the first such agreement concluded by Singapore. These frameworks can be building blocks for greater global economic partnership. Instead of keeping out competition, these building blocks are meant to be open and inclusive, with the view of welcoming more like-minded partners over time. So I'm glad that some economies, including China, have applied or expressed an interest to join the CPTPP and the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. Singapore welcomes like-minded partners to be part of these regional frameworks. By growing these frameworks over time, we can realize, and using this as building blocks, we can realize the vision of a more economically integrated global trading system. A more open and inclusive regional economy and global economy will create more opportunities for countries to make a strong recovery. But this will not happen naturally, coming at a time when societies are wary of the benefits of globalization and openness. Strong leadership will be needed for countries to hold a course. If we succeed in doing so, we can put the world on a firmer and more stable footing for the future. And this brings me to my next point. To win the necessary support for greater economic integration, governments around the world must ensure that their people benefit from globalization. Globalization has brought about tremendous benefits for the world. The period of rapid globalization after the Second World War led to a dramatic increase in global prosperity with a transfer of know-how and more efficient allocation of resources. In recent decades, China's reform and opening up in the late 1970s and India's economic liberalization since the early 1990s illustrate the power of market forces in uplifting the lives of billions of people. But in recent years, support for globalization has waned. Even as liberalization and openness drive efficiency and growth, it has also introduced new stresses. The same forces of disruptions that have led to a step change in innovation and output have also displaced many jobs and livelihoods. Some workers have found it harder to keep pace with skills upgrading and take on new roles. Median wages in many developed economies have stagnated. Inequality has widened as a result. Countries are seeking new ways to redistribute the benefits of globalization. The new agreement on a global minimum tax is one example of how countries are seeking to channel more taxes towards needs like the social programs. But a pure redistribution is a zero-sum game. Each country can better benefit from globalization if it commits to growing the overall pie by transforming their companies and investing in their people across all ages so that they can better capture the opportunities of globalization. This is the true benefit of globalization, a win-win paradigm where businesses and workers in all countries get to gain. This was how it was in the early decades of globalization, and we can restore this paradigm by investing in people and companies requires strong global leadership. Years of investments are needed before rewards can be seen. But if countries are unable to make these investments, we will not be able to rejuvenate globalization, and the world will be the worse for it. As a small and open economy, Singapore is acutely aware that we will be affected by the structural forces sweeping through the global economy. We are doing all that we can to restructure our economy and drive transformation across all sectors. This takes commitment and patience. If we can continue to persevere, I believe our economy can emerge stronger from this crisis, our workers will benefit, and we can contribute to the rejuvenation of globalization. This brings me to my third point, the planet, the third P. This is another area of growth that requires long-term investment at an even longer time horizon than economic transformation, climate change. This is an existential issue for the world. Extreme weather events are already commonplace. Floods, droughts, forest fires, destruction of biodiversity. In Southeast Asia, the consequences will be stark. Sea levels in this region are rising faster than elsewhere. A green transition is necessary, but it will not be easy because there are sharp trade-offs involved. Take carbon tax. It is the most economically efficient mechanism to curb climate change. But raising carbon taxes is not easy. In the short term, there will be upward cost pressure for households and companies. This will affect the cost of living and our competitiveness. However, raising carbon taxes is necessary to spur bold moves that will create a more sustainable future for everyone in the long term. This is why Singapore is reviewing our post-2023 carbon tax trajectory and level. Making the transitions will not be easy. The ongoing global energy crisis is a reminder that transitions are not always seamless, and we need to pace our transition well. Hence, tackling climate change requires strong and sustained global leadership. We have made some progress. The Paris Agreement was a historic milestone. The ongoing COP26 in Glasgow has injected fresh urgency and ambitions into the global efforts. The Climate Change Pact announced on Wednesday between China and the US is most welcome. It is a strong signal that the US and China, the two largest economies in the world, are prepared to set aside differences, to exercise global leadership, to jointly tackle the climate crisis that affects every life on Earth. But much more needs to be done if we are to achieve the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. One area that can make a big difference to achieving our climate goals is in sustainable tech. This is a global challenge that I hope the best minds in the world can focus their attention on. Singapore has made R&D in sustainability a key priority in areas such as making low-carbon hydrogen and carbon capture more feasible. By working together with researchers from around the world, we can accelerate the productizations and scaling of these solutions. For example, as we become more digital, the world is also generating a huge amount of e-waste each year, more than 50 million tons, equivalent in weight to 350 cruise ships. Researchers from Singapore and France have come together to set up a world-first research center to develop greener ways of recycling e-waste. One encouraging outcome so far is that they have developed new methods to increase the efficiency of recycling valuable metals from lithium-ion batteries. We look forward to more collaborations with partners from around the world. So to conclude, the challenges facing us are significant as we work towards a global recovery from the worst recession in a century. But I'm an optimist. While the global order is under strain, COVID-19 has shown the world also has deep reserves of ingenuity and resilience. The theme in this 12th Caixin Summit is building a community of shared future. If the global community can come together and exercise greater leadership, focusing our efforts on partnerships, people, and planet, I have every confidence that we will emerge from this crisis stronger than before. Thank you, and I look forward to our dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very powerful message. And if I may invite you to take your seat here.
Thanks.
Yeah. Please. Yes. Thank you so much for the information, especially the echo of history here that you witnessed China join the WTO. And this morning, with some of the panelists here, we had an extensive discussion on the prospect of China joining CPTPP. We very much look forward to more discussion on that as well. But here, I would want to focus my first question on the still ongoing COVID. We were all wearing masks off stage, and we have to do proper distancing here with 1 meter. And for our audience in Beijing, actually, we turned the Caixin Summit main venue into an online conference because of the new COVID flare-up in China. So considering we're already in the second year dealing with COVID-19, what do you see on the road ahead in our fight with the disease?
Well, I am, I'm more optimistic today than I was maybe even a year or 6 months ago. The main turning point is the successful development of vaccines. But the vaccination process is still ongoing. If you look at the figures from around the world, the rate of vaccinations differ quite a bit. In the developed world, it is much higher at over 60%, and whereas in many of the developing worlds, it is less than 10%. So it is important for us to redouble our efforts on supporting the developing countries in the COVAX facility and in other ways. So this is one. And second, I mentioned earlier on that one of the things that we have to watch out for is the emergence of new variants. Although the scientific reports I've read so far is that many of the scientists are quite optimistic that the Delta variant, we may not have a more transmissible, more virulent variant than the Delta variant. There are mutations that are still going on, but so far it has not been so. So the world is transiting to a phase of living with COVID, much like living with cold and flu, which happens every year. And in the case of flu, every year, new variants come out and a new flu shot is needed. So how do we transit to that is one major issue that we have to work on, because ongoing studies are taking place on the extent to which the effects of the vaccination wanes. There's a lot of scientific studies that are needed on the different on the responses of different people to this vaccines and the extent to which the effect of vaccines wane. So we are still very much in the fighting stage, although I'm feeling more optimistic. But it is also a classic case of a fight of the battle between life and livelihoods. To cut out the virus, to reduce its replication, we have to have many safe distancing measures. Economic activities have been affected. So the global economy has been quite badly hit, although there is hope for a recovery. Part of the recovery is that it was so bad last year, so you have a recovery this year. But to get back to a pre-pandemic trajectory is going to take us time. And it's important for us to work closely together, continue to share information about what works and what doesn't work. We now have great experiments all over the world, different countries practicing different types of measures, and even countries like Singapore, moving from a very strict lockdown earlier on to opening up gradually, and we're opening up in a step-by-step way. So we are trying to navigate the very difficult middle path between opening up very quickly and free for all or locking down. So we'll see how this works and be prepared that we will adjust each time that new information comes out.
Thank you. So a strong sense of community while each country will choose the path that fits its own best.
Absolutely.
I want to use my second question to point out something that you elaborate quite extensively. You witnessed and you participated and you contributed to the expansion of globalization. And you also mentioned that government must ensure that the benefit of globalization to be equally shared among these people. So what government should do to bring more benefits to the people, to let them to enjoy the fruits of globalization? Can you share more on your thinking, especially from the Singaporean experience?
Yes. Well, I think it is very important for us to, first to try and grow the pie. And we are actually not just facing the effects of globalization, we are also going to feel the effects day by day and more on the effects of the new industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution. I have gone to some European countries to visit factories, and the entire factory is a dark factory. There are no humans working, it's just robots and fully automated. And I think the fourth industrial revolution is going to bring about significant change. And in fact, the country with the most human beings is also the country with the most robots, China. So China is accelerating its robotization significantly. Now, but in order for our people to benefit from globalization, it is important, first and foremost, for us to invest in our people. So in Singapore, we take investing in education very seriously. The first 10 years of education are free, and we try and recruit some of the best people to be teachers, and we keep improving our education system. During this COVID period, we had our online learning, which has been put in place for a few years now, and it has been a great help. But when you think about the world after, beyond this, what you learn in school is no longer enough. I think the idea of lifelong learning should not just be an idea, it has to be put into action. And in Singapore, we're trying very hard to do this. Now that brings me to my next point, which is that it is in the interest of every company to invest in your workers. So our National Trade Union Congress has come up with this idea of a company training committee. And I hope the company training committee will evolve and do even more. Essentially, the company takes the effort to train and retrain their workers. We have reviewed and will continue to review our education system. I created 2 additional universities when I was the Minister for Education, and we started this thing on applied learning, and where our polytechnics and ITE adopt the system that's practiced in Germany and Switzerland, this dual system of apprenticeship, where they are learning on the job as well as going to school at the same time. So those sort of hands-on learning are very suitable for certain kinds of learning. And I hope that we can partner companies to do more of this. That said, the world is also undergoing a major demographic transition with aging in many parts of the world, Singapore, China, Japan, in this region, South Korea, but also in Europe. Now, with aging, you'll find that the workers in the older age group tend to have less education. In Singapore, certainly that's the case. When we first became independent, the education system was poor, many people were illiterate, but you're now facing Industry 4.0. So how do we help our older workers gain jobs if they wish to continue working? So we have different measures. One is that we have extended our retirement age and re-employment age so that those who wish to continue working can continue working. We are stepping up on our training. We're working with companies to restructure jobs that are more suited for seniors. And I would say that if we can make good use of this robotics trend, actually our older workers can operate robots quite effectively. And that is a way for us to raise our standard of living, keep our seniors employed and if they wish to, and then continue to make progress. So I think a whole range of different things are needed to help. And of course, we must accept that globalization will have winners and losers. We have to make sure that we have a very good retraining program for our workers so that they can take on new jobs, and with particular emphasis for the workers who are growing older. And finally, of course, the government has a role in redistribution. So in Singapore, we operate a fiscal policy which is progressive. That we tax more on the rich and those who can afford to pay, and we have and then we redistribute the benefits. So the balance of taxes and subsidies, we have done many studies on that, is progressive.
Thank you for the very comprehensive answer from the policy perspective, and also sending a message to the company that everyone has a role to play. So
Indeed.
For the companies, not just going shopping the best robots in the world, but also try to train your workers. Even for the older workers, they can operate the robots pretty effectively. So
I have seen it in so many factories that I visited, and I always commend the management for doing that.
That's good to know, and that's a message I think the companies and the civil societies should take notice. So it's not just top-down, it should be bottom-up as well in
Indeed.
search for the solution. So my last question, I think I want to talk about the third P. We talk about the partnership, we talk about the people. I want to focus on the planet. We all know that today will be the last day of COP26. Everyone has their opinion on how the conference has been, what has been achieved, what's left behind, what should have done better. So how do you assess the process, and especially what do you hope it can achieve for the future generation? Spoiler alert, we actually have a message from the future generation at the very end of the Caixin Summit in Singapore today.
Yes. Well, I am very glad that you have a message from the future generation, because climate change is one such area where it is a structural change, and year by year you may not see the effect, but actually year by year it is coming closer and getting more dangerous. And we must really do our best to prevent us from getting into a path of no return, because there are certain thresholds which we should not cross. And I would say that the good news coming out of the Glasgow meeting is really the US and China having this cooperation pact to work closely together, because these two largest economies in the world are responsible for about 40% of the global emission. And in particular, I think the collaborations in additional areas like in methane emissions, China's pledge to cut the use of coal power, plus not supporting these coal power plants elsewhere. I think those are very positive trends. But the energy transition is going to be a very difficult transition for all economies. But we have to be prepared to do that, prepared for the pain, because the not doing anything will be worse. Yeah. The saying, no pain, no gain. But in this case, it's even much more than that, because it's a necessary pain in the world today, but If we don't do it, I think we are going to jeopardize the future of our children and their children. So I think we have to take it very seriously. And I say, what can we do about it? I would say that besides this pledge that the countries have taken, we've got to ensure that we have the details and we work out specifics on what can be done, what should be done. That's one. Two is that we need to think about ways in which we can price the externalities of this carbon emission correctly. So I mentioned in my speech about carbon taxes. And I think carbon taxes have been implemented in a number of countries at different levels, and we all have to step up to that change. I mentioned that Singapore is reviewing our carbon tax, and the finance minister will announce this next year in the budget. And the other important area is for us to work towards better technology that can be green. So I think this is an area for which we can have very good global cooperation. We are solving a common challenge of mankind, of humankind, right? So you cannot talk about a common future, a shared future, if we are not prepared to share the technologies that we have. So I do hope that we can catalyze more of such collaboration, and that we have companies and researchers all working together on this. I believe that breakthroughs can come if we focus our minds on it. I've seen reports and documentaries of how countries are doing, from hydrogen car to looking at green hydrogen, to looking at within the region the whole issue of carbon sequestration. And the one very important aspect, I think many of our participants here will be from the financial sector. I think green finance is an important aspect of this. If we can, the Singapore government has announced that we will issue $19 billion of green bond. It's a way to catalyze this change. But really the global needs are even greater than that. And if we can have ways in which we can have more green financing, whether it is in the form of bonds, in the form of loans, and in the form of other benefits, it will channel capital to green projects. It will signal to companies, to investors, that green is the new gold. So we should turn green into gold, as one of my former president of university said, by investing in technology, by looking at how we can channel capital to the right users, and don't take a short-term view. I think governments and businesses may take slightly different views. Bigger businesses may take, but I think as a government, we are prepared to invest in our R&D work to fund basic R&D in this area, because I think the government has a longer time horizon and risk appetite. But for companies too, the bigger companies will need to be greener, and I hope that the action that we can all take as investors, particularly in the disclosure requirements, the transparency requirements, will be helpful. And one final point is that we should also have better monitoring of what is being done. The use of satellite technology, for example, to ensure that the deforestation pledge that entities make are actually carried out, and that we will monitor this quite carefully. And I would say that the one often aspect that's not sufficiently discussed is that climate change is not just the risk of rising sea level. For countries like Singapore, is existential, right? We've got nowhere to run. But it also affects the whole biodiversity landscape. It affects every life on Earth, as I said. So when that biodiversity is affected, it can bring about a lot of unknown changes. And this can be quite risky for the whole world. And in fact, there are people who felt that maybe COVID-19 was a result of us not paying enough attention to biodiversity.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And especially you mentioned biodiversity, and China hosted the biodiversity COP15 in Kunming this year, and there will be another leg next year as well. So thank you for the message, which really gives us the key takeaway for me is we really need to trust the power of the market and leverage the power of the technology, but also give the willingness of the people, unleash that, and combine all this
Yes.
to save our planet. So with that, unfortunately, the time is almost up. I have to conclude this conversation. But my takeaway, I'm really impressed by the optimism that you show. And thanks also for sharing to us the long to-do list in front of you and the Singapore government, probably for any government as well, but also the very strong can-do spirit for the global community.
Well, I'm an optimist only if we take action.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's just a dream, right?
Yeah.
So I should say that I'm an optimistic doer. So let us all do things together.
Exactly. That's why we build a community of shared future by
right.
doing the right things. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
DPM, for the wonderful
Thank you.
speech.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please take your seat. Thank you. And then the signal back to Beijing, please.